Hi, good afternoon. So I don't know if it's good or bad to follow lunch, but either way, it's already a great sign because there were supposed to be 120 people in here, and we're really pumped that there's not because that's really overwhelming. But for housekeeping purposes, we kind of want to know who we're talking to. So if you could be so kind as to go onto your personal device or onto your school issued device and go to menti.com if you're familiar with menti.com. There's a couple of audience paste questions in there that we're going to be kind of implementing throughout the presentation. So menti.com, and the code that you'll need is 733392. 733392. And it's just cool to watch it grow. And sorry it's all the way in the middle. We were kind of unfortunate with the setup of a very rectangular room. Oh, yeah, and it does that. All right, so welcome. We are from Elizabeth Forward, which is in the bottom part of Allegheny County, about 10 to 15 miles south of Pittsburgh. Despite that, it's still an incredibly rural school district. So I'm Heather Hibner. I'm the high school assistant principal at Elizabeth Forward. I was previously a classroom teacher there for about 11 years, left for a stint of 3, and then came back as an administrator in the building, which I call my home. I have with me Sarah Cope, who's my SAP coordinator, my math teacher, and my statistician for all things PBIS. And I have my PBIS in-house coach, who used to be my co-teacher when we were in the classroom together, and this is Mr. Mark Ballora. So I'll let them give you a brief overview of themselves, too, other than the one I did.
Thank you, Heather. So our school district, as Heather alluded to, is in southwestern Pennsylvania. And like most school districts in southwestern Pennsylvania that are in the Rust Belt, we have seen a decline of at least 20% of our student population over the past 10 to 15 years. But probably more importantly to this audience, the stigma about mental health and mental health issues that permeates in that area, right? Not the acceptance of getting treated and so forth has been a barrier for school districts and ours in the past. However, we've been very innovative in our approach to dealing with student health related or mental health related issues, and this program will address to that. So our demographic also has changed dramatically, and that was probably one of our selling points when we were first implementing PBIS. I've been in the district for 16 years. So my address and our address to our staff was, hey, things have changed. You're seeing a different type of kid that's coming through these doors than we did 15 or 12 years ago. And with that comes with a lot of issues, right? There's a lot of layers to that we have to peel and address. So that was part of the buy-in a sense. Obviously, it's a district that varies. It's predominantly white, but it is changing because we're attracting more of a transient family to our district because we're a one-to-one school with Apple. So all of our students from K through 12 get an iPad. That's somewhat of a attractor. But more importantly, our reputation over the past several years in the region has greatly enhanced and improved. So we are getting families that are coming into our district, and because I'd say the majority, Heather, are of lower income, there are issues that come with that, right, with those families and those students, more importantly. Okay.
So I'm Sarah Cope. I am a math teacher by trade, but fell in love with the PBIS program because I was very attracted to the data portion of it. And as it grew, I grew to be part of the core team in a multiple perspective and really bought into the program just because it was the way that I functioned in my classroom. It was more about the positive, and I want you to learn than it is about the punitive and the consequences of not being able to, turn something in that's perfect on the first time. It's about go back and try it again. So it was a program that I really fell in love with in terms of PBIS. And that grew as we pushed, and as Mark explained, the need within the building had. I was looking at a daily basis at the students' names that would come up that were often part of the discipline process. So whether they were being referred to the office, whether it was minor behaviors that was being tracked by the teachers, that was right in front of me. So once we reached our universal tier 1 fidelity and we started to look at our tier 2s and tier 3s, I really kind of raised my hand because we were in the process of changing some personnel anyway, and I said, I need to get my hands into SAP, our tier 2s and our tier 3s, because I see those kids' names every day and I know what their data looks like. So we have that information that is in the background that we can go ahead and track and put numbers and qualitative to them, but allows us to then go ahead and choose the correct interventions for them as we approach it from the team perspective for SAP or tier 2, tier 3. In terms of our learning objectives today, we have a new tool that's in place. It is our universal screener. We use the SRSS-IE. So this allows us to gather a lot of information from our teachers quickly and without cost, be able to pull this information. We have the students' responses, we have group responses. So we're going to take a look at what that tool is, how did we implement it, what did we do once we had the results, and then if we have time, we'll look at some particular case studies and how it implemented the students within our district.
So while we are high school, and we're actually going to speak to you about the implementation at the secondary level, I see from the Menti, if you guys got on there, we are speaking to a lot of elementary teachers, administrators, and then some regional and district office folks. This is still applicable despite that, whatever level you work at, because this is like it's called a universal screener. We're just going to speak to specifically how we implemented it, the tool that we designed to make it free, and you have to have an in-house techie for that. And then more importantly, the interventions that were put in place that we already had established in-house at the secondary level. So that's kind of what we're focusing on here. All right, background, that would be Mark.
So we'll go back again to 2003 when I first started in the school district and take it to 2012 very briefly. We were the typical high school. Okay, I went into the boys' bathroom to get kids out of the bathroom. I would come out smelling like I was in the worst dive bar in Pittsburgh, right? I mean, we had smoking going on. We had chew tobacco is a big thing. We had fights in our school. But probably one thing that took us to this point was a student suicide in, I believe, like 2010, 2011. So with that, I had come from a school district that had first implemented PBIS, and I can tell you about the power of shared leadership, because that's what's really important, administrators. Look, I'm a teacher, a special education teacher, I coach. I only dress like an administrator, but I have a voice at the table, just like our students and with our administration. So that shared leadership was so important. That's also what helped with the buy-in of PBIS in our school. So we basically did it backwards. We obviously, as most models here have been addressed for many years, the PBIS model starts at the elementary level, right? And we build up. Before we said we're going to go backwards because the need was at the high school. So we started at the high school, and it's not until just last year that all three levels now in our school district, middle and elementary, are at this level, implementing PBIS, and we have a common language and so forth and framework in place. However, we used the analogy of flying without our so with no landing gear and so forth. We went up into the air. I can just tell you briefly. We got our teams set up. We had a lot of subcommittees put forth. We had teacher input to the framework. Our superintendent had come into one of our big meetings, saw the action that was taking place, went back to the school board and said, man, they're doing some really great stuff. The school board says, let's go with it. Just, instead of having that year of planning and putting it in place, the school board said, hey, we'll do whatever you want, get it started next month. Literally within 3 months, we had to start PBIS at our school. We're blessed. We're fully funded at the secondary level. And how does that help us? With our acknowledgments. So our students, when we give a Brave Buck, it's called, when we give a Brave Buck out, and then of course that student puts it on the board, the Brave board, I think some districts call it the principal's 100, 200. When a row is filled, those 10 students get a $10 gift card. We want to support our community, so we buy gift cards from our local merchants. So those 10 students get a $10 gift card to a selected business in town. And then after we flip the board a couple times, we use our in-house consumer science culinary teacher and his students to make luncheons for our staff that awarded or acknowledged those students with the Brave Bucks. That's brave. That's buy-in to the total, right? You give a teacher a home-cooked meal in a sense, they love it. So here we go. We're just up and running. It took us several years to get to this point, but more importantly, it was the data that we were collecting through Swiss and several other of the instruments that Sarah has been fantastic in decoding and interpreting for us. Lastly, most importantly, it's about getting the data and this out to your staff, because I will say this from this perspective. I was once on the Sap team, and the Sap team was like this. Mrs. Smith, tell me about Joey. And next thing you know, another teacher would say, oh, I went to school with Joey's sister, and this is what they used to do, and this was a habit. And then it went around and around and around, and we never got to Joey's core issue. We never got to the several other students we needed to discuss, and so forth. So the power to what we have developed here, and what Heather and Sarah have developed, is that there's one, shared input. The universal screener goes to 9th grade teachers such as myself. Now, every teacher that sees a student in their classroom has a voice, a voice and some type of data or input that they can put in regarding that student, how they're doing both academically, socially, and so forth. And then that is shared with the staff. So it's very, very important to have that type of shared leadership and a voice.
So just to talk about our teams a little bit and how we function, our core PBIS team, we meet weekly, and this is pretty much any willing volunteer. So we typically have 6 teachers, 5 teachers, a guidance counselor, and our 3 admin that kind of rotate in and out according to everybody's availability. So this is a weekly turn of events for us, that we have a set time that we always give and dedicate to PBIS, and this is looking at our universal and our multiple levels. So, Mark is our leader at that point. I sit on that team, can talk about the tier 2, tier 3. We also have a media center specialist who comes in and looks at our student voice and what the students are saying. So all those dynamics come to the table pretty regularly. Now, our second team that functions is what we refer to as the Sap team. It is our tier 2 and our tier 3 intervention. Now, I will say that when we married the two, when we brought in the idea of our Sap team, as we refer to it, and our PBIS, we needed to make some hard choices, and they weren't popular choices at that point. There were a lot of people who sat around the original Sap table that we said, we're sorry. We can't have the storytelling like what Mark had explained, because we're not getting anywhere. It's no longer a problem-solving situation. It's just storytelling. It's admiring the problem. So now when we go and we sit at the table, it is just myself, admin, our SAP liaisons, and our guidance counselors. Any SAP case managers, they report directly to me with the students that they are working on, and I take that information to the table. Our school nurse, she reports out to either myself or to the guidance counselors or admin. It's brought to the table. So we minimize that team so that we can keep it more productive and moving. So now when we have a student, we look at new, relevant information, the data collection that we have done through the teachers and what the teachers are saying, any input from the parent. We keep it to that basic information so that we know what is the best intervention for us to choose for this student. That kind of leads us into the idea of the blending of the two and why you should do it. Accountability was a big item. Having that data to be able to back all of those students and why we were making the decisions that we were doing, it made it also a consistent process. Students who exhibit this, this, and this, we're going to have them in a educational group. Those who may need something else, maybe we're looking at a check and connect for them. The QR code that is there, that's actually going to send you to the PBIS document that they put out in 2017 that is a guideline for marrying SAP and PBIS. So you can just even go onto their website and Google that, but that QR code is going to take you there. It's just, you know, their recommendations of how to blend the two of them together. In terms of the other things, you'll see those as you're going along. You know, it's just about consistency, that consistency that you build throughout the building. Everyone knows the process now. They have a referral, what do they do? When we get a student, what do we do? By marrying those together and building out those tiers, that tier supplement also helped us have multiple interventions. So as you were going through your forum, you know, we picked up ideas and started implementing after the forum things like renew and check and connect, check in, check out, groups. So all those things that you were learning about here at the forum are things that we've taken back after we learned about them and put them in place. So it gives us options, and that's kind of important when we are talking about blending the two.
All right, so the SRSS-IE. So we actually, this is the tool that we decided upon. We went through some trainings. We actually happened upon the idea of Universal Screener at this exact conference 2 years ago. I oversee the 9th and 10th grade, and I oversee transition from middle to high school. So what we were seeing in our SAP and in our PBIS meetings was that given what Mark had told you about our changing population, we saw an increase in mental health issues. And we were seeing that we didn't necessarily identify the correct student for the interventions that we had in place. So while we had all these interventions in place, we just weren't picking the right kids for it, and we didn't know why. So we happened upon a conference session here 2 years ago held by Pittsburgh Patan, and I believe Mike Miner was actually the one running the session, and we read the description, and Sarah and I looked at each other because we had been saying, something's missing, what are we doing wrong? And we walked into this session and left there with, oh, this is it, this is what we weren't doing. We thought we were doing anything wrong, we just weren't doing that extra something. So we realized we need to figure this out. So then last year in the fall, and if you can find this still, I believe Patan Pittsburgh still runs these, go to that session and learn about it. There were grant procurements that you can get where you can go, they give you about $5,000, which is what we applied for last year, which is part of our overview here. We applied for the grant, got it, and then we designed the tool ourselves so that we didn't have to use the $5,000 for that. So I'll show you in a minute how to get to that. So the SRSS-IE is the one that we happened upon that worked for us. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for everybody, but it was what we needed because of specifically that I. The internalization is what we needed to identify in students. So specifically, this one looks at not only the externalization behaviors, but the internalizations. With transition students, that's what we were missing. So we have our teachers come in and score them on these things within the SRSS-IE. The externalization behaviors are stealing, lying, cheating, sneaky behavior, peer rejection, which I'll come back to because that one doesn't seem like it would be an externalization, but it is. Negative attitude and aggressive behavior. These are the kids who are frequent flyers down in my office. These are the ones that we know we need to do something for. We were identifying these kids correctly because of PBIS and Swiss. The ones that we weren't identifying correctly were the I's. These are the peer rejection again, the emotionally flat, the shy and withdrawn student, the depressed, the anxious, and the lonely. That's why we picked this one. We needed something that dug a little bit deeper than the externalization behaviors. So year one, we just dipped our toe in. We weren't really sure what we were doing, and Dr. Kathy Lane says, if you screen, you must intervene, and that was a whole lot of pressure for us because we figured, oh shoot, if we screen and we come up with data that says students need interventions, we have to do something. So that made us a little nervous, right? So in year one, we decided we're just gonna screen the one time, which is wrong, Okay, don't do that. But we figured we're going to do it one time just to figure it out. So this was actually, seems like it was 3 years ago, and it was 2 years ago, last year. So we screened after we got the grant in the fall, and I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like, what the screening tool that we designed looks like. But we screened in the fall, well, it was kind of December-ish, and then we put interventions in place. Once we had it where we knew and we designed our own system that worked for us, year 2 this year, we jumped in. That's the images that you see there, right? We just jumped off the deep end. We figured it out, and we were like, you know what? If we're going to fail forward because we're helping kids, and that's okay. So the second year that we did it, we actually started this time last year for year 2. So we decided within our meetings, well, shoot, why don't we get the 8th grade teachers to sit down and give us baseline data so we don't have to wait? I mean, genius. So that's what we did. We started sending Sarah and I have a transition counselor goes down. They teach the middle school teachers very quickly about the overview of what the SRSS is, and then they give us baseline data, which is great because then I take a look at it over the summer because, I don't get summers off. I sit there and look at baseline data for SRSS-IE. That's my fun time. So then I know before they even come in who my high flyers are. Imagine the power with that. So what we actually did this year is had staffings. Imagine that, the thought of that, having a staffing on 9th graders before they even get there. So, second year we jump full in. So this is actually what our tool looks like, minus any identifying information. That's why there's the little bar on the left. So we actually designed, the first year it looked a little different. This is what it is now, and this works for us. So we actually have this on Google. It is privated, shared with teachers for a small window of time, and then they are given no more access to it again. So this is what it looks like, right? So it's color coded. So all the teachers go in, the 9th grade teachers go in, they put their data in, and then they are ripped of the availability to look at it again. So this is what the actual tabs within that looks like. Okay, so it has all of the screen. I know it's hard to see, it's like really small, but I wanted you to at least see that there are multiple subject areas on there. So I have my math is in yellow, my bio is in green, then I have English and social studies on there as well. This is what the individual screening tabs look like. Now what it will actually do is my summary sheet will yank and pull all of that information into my top sheet, which is my summary page, where I can actually look at different screenings, vertical screenings of different students, and I can see either their increase in externalization and internalization behaviors or their decrease. So it's color coded too. So I know you're going to have probably questions most importantly on the tool, and we're going to save time at the end to go over that. But this is actually what it looks like. So on the far right for you guys, there's a white vertical column, and that actually says intervention in place, yes or no. And then we get deeper into what intervention do we need based on the data. So you do have to go down into the layers of the tabs to figure out if it was an internalization or an externalization behavior. But that is the actual tool.
So what you're seeing here then is the process that we use following the data, because I always refer to that number that is generated in our universal screener as kind of your window. It is the number that allows us to peek inside and say, I need a deeper look into that kid, and I'm going to go inside. So following that, we have some of those numbers that come up as either low risk or medium risk. Typically, again, the high risk ones we know. We go ahead and we follow up with additional teacher input. When the teachers are giving numbers, they're just qualifying it. But now we really want to know, why did you give that kid a 3 in peer rejection? Why did you give them a 2 on loner or withdrawn? So we try to figure out more information and get more input from the teachers. We also have 2 programs in place. SWIS, which you probably hear quite often about, that is the data system or house that we use to collect our office discipline referrals. But we actually use a system called ABE. It is through, lack of things, Safe Schools maybe, that allows us to do our minors. ABE, the teachers get to input their minor behaviors. Because honestly, when you're in a building of 700 kids and 65 teachers, and I was the person who was data, and I was inputting every single minor, it was too much. Plus, I got to teach 6 classes. So It became a little bit much, but it's much better when the teachers get to go ahead and put in that information on their own. So we review all of that information, and then we start to have those conversations with the student. Our transition counselor, the one that works 2 days in the middle school with those 8th graders and 3 days up at the high school with our 9th graders, she starts the conversation with the student. You know, hey, what's going on? You know, we see that you act a little bit different in science class than you do in English class. What's going on? Also, the next step, always parent calls. We do quite a bit of conversation with the home. Teachers in our building are required 50 parent contacts throughout the year that we need to log. So teachers are having those conversations. Guidance counselors are having those conversations. Admin's having those conversations so that the families are in the loop with us. And now we're at the SAP intake. So we've gotten all that information. The universal screener opened up that window so we know who to look at. We made the look in depth at those students, and we're bringing all that information to the table so that we can go ahead and make those decisions. What's the best intervention? Do they need a mentor? Do they need a group that focuses on anxiety? Do they need outside services because their depression is so severe that that may be a decision that their family wants to pursue meds? So that's all something that we bring to the table, and we can now make an informed decision. We almost jumped the gun on the first one, and I think that we'll be the first to admit that. That first round of screening, when we were just dipping our toes in, without doing the first 3 steps, we wanted to throw them into interventions. And that's part of the reason why we didn't end up with some of the students in the correct interventions. But as you build in the more follow-up after your universal screener, then you can go ahead and make those correct decisions. Okay. So this is the time to go ahead and input, if you haven't already, back into the Menti. What kind of interventions do you have in place? Because it's very important to start putting your interventions in place before you get to your universal screener. Because again, once you screen, you must intervene. So if you don't have any interventions in place and you don't have any options, it makes your decisions very difficult. So go ahead, if you haven't yet, go ahead and put them in. It looks like we've got quite a few, but we'll give you another couple seconds here. What kind of interventions do you have? Yep. So as the terms get bigger, that means more people have put those in. Okay. So I'm seeing things like SAP, Tier 1, Tier 2. There was check in, check out was a very popular one that I saw. Some mentoring, study supports. Yeah. School-based mental health.
These are all great places to start. Isn't that cool? Anybody use Menti in their classroom? Use that? No? Love it? Okay.
All right, so let me show you ours. So these are some of the things that we have to offer. And it is everything dealing from our mental health spectrum to our poverty level and the needs that they have. You know, our hygiene baskets, we have the PBIS universal supports, our mental health, our case managers, our social groups, we have a pantry, we have Renew, we have health, and we have staffings. So a lot of our interventions here are things that we are able to choose from. We have school-based mental health that has a satellite office in our building. We have a very unique agreement with our SAP liaisons to have behavioral health counseling. Behavioral health counseling is a one-on-one goal-setting intervention where it helps us because it is not insurance-based. So it is a service that they provide at the cost of the district, not to the student or the family, that allows us to bypass a lot of those interventions that we have or barriers that we have due to insurance, because that will happen for our students.
So something that we learned from our first implementation of the SRSS to where we are now at our fifth screening is that we learned that the teachers had to be given time to be thoughtful and pensive in their scoring. Originally, we had a room that was an alumni room where we had blocked off and the teachers could go at their designated time and go head down and sit quietly and work on the SRSS and the screening. It became a bit of a sewing circle. It turned back to that Sap meeting, and that's not what you want. You actually want the teacher to be able to be alone with their thoughts and to really think about the different characteristics of the student of whom they're screening. So we've changed it since the first time. So we thought that would be a good idea to put, kind of like the ninth grade team together based on availability. I highly discourage you from doing it that way. You'll get skewed data. I would say what works for us best now is the tool is released to the teachers, they're given their window of time, and they actually just sit in their classrooms on their planned period with their door shut and maybe some music playing. And that's how they do it now, and it's more efficient. My data is correct, and it doesn't become a little bit jaded because of the sewing circle. So that's something that we had to learn the hard way. So Sarah had alluded to, maybe we didn't do it right the first time, but we did it. And we did put implementations in place, and most importantly, we learned from our mistakes and have since fixed them. So we are more than open about talking about our failures. If you know anything about Elizabeth Forward, we talk about failing forward, just jump in, get it done, figure it out, learn from it, fix it, and move on. So that's what we decided to do with this as well. All right, so on the last screen, if you have any questions, how did you get staff buy-in and how much resistance did you experience? That's a good question. So the question, because they told me I had to repeat it even though it's up there, I'll say it again. How did you get staff buy-in and how much resistance did you experience? Staff buy-in wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, and I have, of course, the administrative lens, so maybe it's skewed, but I don't think that we had a whole lot of issue with staff buy-in. One thing that I know and I love about our teaching staff at Elizabeth Forward is that they love their students and they're relational teachers and they're relational leaders. That's what they are and that's what they do. So you saw on Sarah's screen a couple back there some things that maybe you're like, why is that up there? That's weird. Why are you doing pantries and food baskets? Well, our staff started that movement. They recognized with our changing population that students aren't going to learn if they're hungry. Students aren't going to learn if they're wondering where they're going to sleep at night. So that's just who we have. So just to make that clear, we didn't really have an issue, in my view, of staff buy-in because our teaching staff is awesome. And I'm not saying that because they're standing here, but it's true.
Now, I will also talk a little bit about the staff buy-in. You're going to have the resistance regardless, but we were very strategic in picking people to get and solicit opinions from. Those who we found or we thought would be the most resistant are the ones that we approached first. So we would put this idea of, any kind of PBIS initiative, the data collection, the now needing to do the minors that they input and use that ABE program. We went to those who we thought would be the most resistant first and allowed them to have that conversation with us. It is often, like Mark said, with our admin, that it's that shared voice. So we don't hesitate to say to our admin what people are thinking and what barriers we think we're going to have. So we try to prevent that ahead of time by constantly having conversations up and down the hallway. The 6 of us that sit on this team carry a wide variety throughout the building. Quite a few are special ed, but there's special ed within the English department, within the math department, within the science department. So there's a lot of feelers out there. And just being allowed to have their voices heard was a huge help in terms of staff buy-in. We also reward plenty. So those teacher rewards are probably just as prominent as our student rewards.
I can kill 2 questions really quickly. And guys, keep them coming on there. And if we don't have time, because we figured there'd be a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to go through these. But someone had asked, who do we screen? We screen the entire 9th grade class. We focus on transition. So we actually grab that data when they're in 8th grade, and then we just do that again in September, 4 weeks in after our teachers have time to get to know the students. So we have 2 data points immediately before the end of September. And there was another one. what teachers, ninth grade teachers. And they fill it out for the entire ninth grade class, not just the behavioral students, it's the whole class.
So every teacher that has that student provides that input.
I have at least 4 data points on each ninth grade student 4 weeks into school. So I have my English teacher, we decided upon core content. We don't take data from the guidance counselor. She's part of the Sap team and the problem-solving unit. They're not necessarily the ones that give us the information for the screening tool. So we get a data point from a math, a social studies, a science, and an English teacher on the screening tool. So we get it from the 8th grade teachers after they have a whole year of data. So if you go back and you saw how jaded that data was because it was a whole year of frustration. That's why we take a time out and get a new data point 4 weeks in. And if you want to go back to the slide, the summary slide, it's pretty evident. And something interesting about that slide also is that the students, 3 of them that were red within the first semester of school had been put into external placement. That's one of our case studies as well. So especially if you see a line through their name, they weren't making it, and we had to find better options for them. So they're in either partial or they were expelled from behavioral things. They just didn't get it right. So, and Mark, there's a question on here about PBIS. Do you guys want to just holler them out, or do you like this format? Is this working? Question in the back. Okay, so the question is, once you get the data points, do you have 4 separate scores, or do you have one data point? And it's both. So it's an Excel spreadsheet, if you can picture that, right? So we have the tabs on the bottom that are the screeners. So I can dig deeper if I need to, but my summary sheet will give me the average. And it'll give me the I average and the E average and the total average. Any others? Or I'll go back to the Menti. For the PBIS? All right.
So let me add to this also that I'm a co-teacher along with several of my other special ed teachers. So it's just not a regular ed teacher looking at these students. I'm in the room in biology and English. My other colleagues are in algebra and so forth. So, it's just not one perspective in regards to regular ed. It's a special ed teacher also that sees all students, regular and special ed, and when we're getting this data compiled. Oh, I'm sorry, can I repeat that question for you? I'm sorry.
You were talking about teacher reinforcements. What have you found rewarding for the teachers?
So teacher reinforcements, no doubt, is food. And we're lucky because we're a secondary school, of course. We have, we have the consumer science teacher and his students. Our kids that work with him love preparing these meals in regards to the meals and desserts and so forth. But on the other levels, you could just, use one of your local delis and so forth. Gene Day. Gene Day is a huge thing. We'll reward with a Gene Day. What else? Early outs. Yes. It's so we're not allowed to do gift cards any longer.
That's correct. We got audited.
Yeah. So the state doesn't like that. So nor does our business manager. So we don't do that type of incentive in a sense. This question. Yeah.
This one's pretty easy. This is tips.
Oh, so we have been trained in the tips layout for our meetings. So that kind of keeps us on track. It gives us some action plans and who is responsible for it. Every week we have 2 of our members that share the responsibility to make sure that the agenda or the tips is ready. What should we need to be added? What can be deleted? So tips is kind of what keeps us on track in terms of our meeting agendas and keeps us action, because from week to week to week, you almost walk out of the meeting and forget about it. But tips is kind of what keeps us on track for that. Tips is, thank you, team initiated problem solving.
It's a very specific and formulaic way to run a meeting.
With roles and time duration.
We implemented experiencing the same problem, is the question.
Yeah, so there's roles and time duration and what's the action that will take place. In all honesty, look, we have tons of ideas, and it flows every week. We meet as a leadership team once a week. Our administration has allowed us one period. Sarah and I get a period every day, second period to meet and discuss if we have to talk with administrators and so forth. But as a building-wide team, district leadership team, we meet once a week, and our administrators pop in. More importantly, I talked about voices. Now we have a student voice. We've had a student voice for several years. They're called the Brave Bunch. In short, we used to have teacher nominations of that middle-of-the-road kid that really isn't like the star athlete or the head of the class. We're looking for that middle-of-the-road kid that probably could use some type of leadership training and could be a good voice for his or her peers. So we went from that. We did interviews to, we've now evolved to now the National Honor Society, our kiddos that are seniors. We're going to meet over the summer. We're going to revamp that. The National Honor Society kids have been great. However, they're just seniors, and thus, I don't want to say that legacy, but that we have to always train in a sense. So we're going to integrate more ninth graders and 10th graders into that.
So I saw some questions here. This one that is up talking about student self-reporting and is it accurate? That's where the conversations start. After we get the data point, we have the conversation between our transitional counselor and our students that they can do some self-reflection at that point. So we don't have them quantifying it by putting a number down into a screener, but we do have their input as we go further on in the process. There was also the question of why are we only screening ninth graders at this point? We see a major issue with our transition from our middle school teaming aspect to our high school. We were losing and many of our students were drowning at that ninth grade level. So we really wanted to focus in and hone in on the ninth grade. And also it comes down to time of the team, commitment of the team. We want to make sure that we have this right at this level before we go and continue to expand on to say our 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade. So it's just a matter of still being in that building process. We're not done yet. I saw a hand here.
I just wanted to ask you, you said the transition counselor meets with the students. Is that someone who's a teacher also, or that's a sole
No,
position?
she is a guidance counselor. She is 3 days at our high school building, 2 days at the 8th grade middle school building. So she's just one that goes back and forth and can relay a lot of that information for us.
So this kind of goes along with all of that. We have not yet gone above ninth grade. Like Sarah said, that's where we saw a major issue with our population. So that's why we ended up doing the ninth grade specifically. In the future, we may change and we may implement it at the entire high school level and make it truly universal for us. Because the question, I think what you were alluding to, whomever asked it, is, if you're only doing it at ninth grade, originally our thoughts were, well, then we're getting the interventions in place. But what if, and this is what I think the question was asking, later down the road, a student develops some externalization or internalization behaviors. So that's something that we have to grow into, and we're just not there yet, quite honestly. But it is something that we know we need to do. Do you have to choose a specific grade? What I'll tell you that I learned is that you can choose to do this however works for you, but if you screen, you have to put implement or interventions in place. So the question up here is, do you have to screen every grade? We didn't. We screened one cohort and we take that data and we immediately put interventions in place, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you where you are.
Oh, there was a question before about how do we track or the forms for our office referrals. When we did our priority work first thing at our initial phase of PBIS, revamping our office discipline referral was part of that. We looked at the behaviors and expectations that we wanted for our students. We looked at the data of what was already in place from previous years that we had did some accounting for to see what were the problems. And we also used that Swiss to kind of help us dictate what is the type of data that we should be collecting. So for anyone who works in Swiss, there's those multiple tabs, everything from the demographic portion of the data collection to the behavior to what was the response and consequence. So those were the things that are all on our paper copy for our office discipline referral. Now, I will tell you that at one point we did go completely digital for our office discipline referrals, but we found for us, we like that paper copy. It gives us, that file to build, the paper copies being there, sometimes the annotative teacher written responses that are on there. We don't ever want to lose that. So we did, and always, I think for now, we'll stick to a paper copy for our office discipline referral. In terms of the minors, we do track that all digitally through our ABE tracking system. It's very similar to Swiss in terms of what you are inputting, but it's just a quick notation for what our teachers can use.
Is that a paid thing, maybe?
That is a paid thing, yes.
Swiss now does paperless too for minors.
Correct, and we've had some discussion around the table about that. The only issue that I see that we will miss from that, ABE allows our teachers to see what other teachers have inputted.
Right, once you input that, you're done.
Right, and in Swiss, it's not viewable. And being secondary, for those of you who are high school, there's a component that you just cannot get around, that the teachers are very siloed at times. Whether they are split off by department, or you only get to see the people that you have a common plan with, or maybe a lunch with. And it's very difficult for teachers to be able to get together and get that collaboration to find out what's going on. That ABE allows them to see that happening. So what they're documenting, if something happened in their classroom, it's always a tech violation. This teacher is also seeing a tech issue. So we know that it's happening in multiple places. That was the one feature that I can't get rid of at this point.
So this question reads, do you have a list of questions that are on your screening that you would be willing to share? We simply use the SRSS-IE model, and there's no questions, it's just observable behaviors. So those internalization ones that I had read off before, and then the externalization that I had read off before. So we actually don't ask questions, and it's a 0, 1, 2, 3 rating scale, so it's quantified, and that's what we use. And it's truly just the SRSS-IE model. So if you want to look into that, you can just go onto the ci3t.org. You can find a ton of information on there. All right, there's another one. That wasn't it. Sorry. So we inform parents about the screening of their child at our 9th grade orientation, and then again at curriculum night. We let them know that we're going to be doing a screening. It's to make sure that we as a school district are doing everything that we need to support their children emotionally, behaviorally, socially, and academically. So they are told that this will happen. It's sent out in literature in the summer as well in their mailing packet that every kid gets at home. So we send it out there as well and gives them an overview of what it is and why we're doing it. I'd be hard pressed to find a parent who would tell me, no, don't help my child. So typically we don't have any pushback at all. So once we do screen, a question I also saw, and I probably won't find it in, there's a lot of good questions in there, is how do we inform them? My school counselor that goes back and forth between the middle and the high school, she's the one that makes initial contact and says, we did the screener because they already knew we were going to do it. Here's the results. What's going on? Is there any intervention? Like, are they already seeing a therapist outside? Because that matters. And we kind of start the conversation there. There was a question in the back. Go ahead.
I'm glad you've been so successful, and thank you for sharing, but how, in a lot of districts, we have to overcome parental concern about overly identifying or being subjective about social and emotional issues. So did you get school board approval, and how did you get buy-in from parents?
Buy-in from parents. I don't know that we've had a hard time with parents. We truly haven't. We've been fortunate. And that's not going to be everybody, and we're aware of that. But what we do is tell them, here's what it is, here's why we're doing it. And I haven't had one phone call in 2 years to say, please don't do that. Really? Yep.
Do the parents have to sign a paper,
Not when it's universal.
like to be in SAP?
Different. That's the next one. That's different. Yeah.
Once we start with interventions, we need parent permission.
Because that's, we never get the paperwork back.
We've had people decline. Maybe that's what you're asking. We've had phone calls where we call home and say, hey, we have this information, we have these interventions we can put in place. Are you interested in us helping you? And we've had people politely decline, but we definitely log that. We have to make sure that we log to cover our teachers and ourselves that we identified an internalization at-risk student and the parent declined. So we've had people say, no, thank you.
Do the parents have a right to decline to even do the assessment?
They could. Yep, they absolutely could. We just haven't had that.
That's how, when we originally started this, we did look at how the board has the policies written, and it's an opt-out policy for any kind of screener that's used. It could be the vision screener, but they have to contact us to do the opt-out, otherwise it is assumed opt-in. I'm sorry. Okay, did everyone hear that? Everyone way in the back. So our board policy for any kind of screener, the vision screening, the health screenings, this universal screener, is that they are going to assume that you are opting in, and then the parent has to physically take action if they want to opt out.
How often do we screen? We screen each cohort 4 times, once in 8th grade in May, then we do an initial screening at the high school level in September, then we wait again until just before or just after, depending upon how hectic the school calendar is, right around Christmas time, and then again in April. So we screen each cohort 4 times.
How long do you leave that screen open?
I leave that screener open for about 3 to 4 days. That's it.
And how many students average per teacher per student? Like how many evaluations in that 3 weeks?
Good question. So what's the average class? How many students does a teacher on average have? My direct instruction teachers could have about 15 to 20 total 9th grade students that they're going to be screening. My biology teacher might have closer to 120. So the direct instruction would be my special ed English teacher.
How do they only have 15? Do you assign them certain students?
Yes.
They don't
Yes.
do every kid that
My DI English, yeah.
every kid that they teach.
Well, I might have a direct instruction special ed teacher who only has a very small portion of that cohort, but I still need an English data point. So they may not be screened by my gen ed English teacher because they're in DI. But, yep.
So, like, in biology might have 120. So when does that teacher do this? During their prep?
Most of them have elected to do it during their prep. So a CBA question is going to be, do we compensate them for that? And the answer is yes. They can either get paid or given comp time. Yep.
In our building, we started doing the SRSS, and we found a really good time to do it was during the workshop days. So we had like our homeroom teachers
Okay.
assess during that time, and for our teachers to do about 30 students, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So it doesn't take
Yeah,
long.
it's not I agree, it's not overwhelming. So I think it's going to be different for everybody. We don't have a homeroom period ever. We have a 9-period day, and it's full from the time the students get through the door there in first period. They have a lunch period, so everybody's schedule is going to be a little different. It's going to look different per master schedule. So we didn't have the availability of that built-in free time in a week or a day, so we had to figure out how are we going to do that within the constraints of the teacher's contract. So that's what ended up being how we did it. Yeah. I'm sorry. Got in the back.
When you benchmark if your 8th grader has a sprint, do you then make those parents go home this summer, or did you wait till fall?
The parents is the question, are the parents informed that they're being screened? And the answer is yes. Do we call as the high school team with the data point on the parent in the spring for the 8th grader?
Yeah, if they're screened and they are elevated at risk, and we're saying if you screen, you have to intervene, did that phone call happen over the summer, let the parent know, hey, your kid's at risk, even though
Okay.
we're using a fee? We're doing the same thing.
Got it. We as the high school don't call. At that point, the conversation is had between the high school, hey, this kid's off the charts. What you'll typically find is they already have interventions in place at the middle school. So we don't alert the parent, hey, by the way, we're really concerned before your kid gets here. That conversation better have already happened, right?
Take this one. So Heather mentioned it before. This one's asking of whether or not there are screeners that are completed by the student. There is a website, and I always say it wrong, so I purposely looked it up on the phone. So it is the letter C, I, the number 3, T.org. This is the website that Kathleen Lane who is one of our keynote speakers tomorrow morning, I believe it is. Tomorrow. So she introduced us to this site, and it houses multiple types of screeners. So if the one that we used, you do not think that that would be something that would work for you, there are other screeners that are available that are out there. Some are per cost, some are free, but it's a good one-stop shop, at least to introduce you to the different screeners that are out there on that website.
Have you guys ever considered like taking the internal or external that they have, like stealing or whatever, and kind of accustoming it to yourself, to your school, and what your problems are?
I love that you brought that up. So the question was looking at the specific items that we scored, like the stealing, and then looking at how it arranges in the building. And that's actually one of our next steps. As I continued on with the training for Universal Screener, and I was down in Washington, D.C. for the national conference, I went to a section that talked about how the universal screeners can be used beyond just looking at the individuals. So what the presenter there recommended is to take a look at the vertical alignment of our screeners, and you look at your base of your population. If so much of your population is scoring high in that one area, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, then you can go ahead and build like your small groups or your social groups around there. You can build large universal interventions at that point. So starting to look at those vertical columns that define just what the behaviors are will allow us now to have further things to address both universally and with the small group. So that's kind of our next step.
So the question reads, can you talk a little bit about the information from the results that you share with teachers and staff? So something that we started last year was we brought I called them my ninth grade focus team. It was basically my ninth grade, anyone that had kind of hands on in ninth grade within a core content met about 3 to 4 times throughout the school year to just have conversations to talk about, some commonalities and behavioral issues that they were seeing. That is where a sewing circle I think is okay, but that's the part where I would come in, give them a quick overview about the results and say, hey, thanks for doing the screener. We had, 75% of the students that were in the low risk, 25%. We put interventions in place. Thank you. I'll, be reaching out to you again around December. And that's pretty much how the information is shared. They don't get the specific information. They just get thank you. And that's the form that we had found worked for us. Oh, all right. So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I have about 12 things up there. So I think for sake of time, we'll kind of go ahead and release you. But we anticipate people are going to have a lot of questions because we kind of just figured this is kind of something new. So for all intents and purposes, I think we'll be done. Everybody wants their code, though, right? You gotta get your code.
Thank you so much. I think this format was really helpful with all the questions, so thank you. Reminder that the PowerPoints for this session and other sessions will be on the website. The recordings will also be on the website, so please check back for that.